Hello everyone, this is your friend from Naruto Audio Fanfics, and we are back once again with a brand new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto wrote the ultimate shinobi dating guide and accidentally won Sakura Haruno, Tenten, Hinata Hyuga and Ino Yamanaka, Part 1. If you enjoy this story, don't forget to hit the like button, thumbs up, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing Naruto fanfics like this. So without wasting any more time, let's start today's fanfic. A blonde, orange-clad boy picked himself off the ground and gave himself a quick pat down. Each soft clap of an open hand on fabric let off a puff of dust, only stopping once he felt satisfied enough of his relative cleanliness. However, his impromptu clean-up and the remaining dirt that clung to him was proof enough of another rejection from his dear Sakura-chan. Damn it! Uzumaki Naruto swore, kicking at an absolute, defenseless pebble and sending it to the curb. Why won't Sakura-chan like me? At least I treat her better than that jerk, Sasuke. He ranted to himself. Suddenly there was a puff of smoke and a man had seemingly appeared next to Naruto. In truth, he'd merely snuck in whilst the smoke afforded him the luxury of appearing. The man's aged appearance and worn, stale white clothing gave him the outward appearance of a sage. However, everyone that knew of this man also knew a more appropriate name for him. Ero Sennin, Naruto exclaimed, pointing an accusing finger at said man. Pervert hermit indeed. The man, Jiraiya, one of the renowned 3 legendary ninjas, had grit his teeth upon hearing the name his student had adopted for him. However, instead of promptly reprimanding the boy, he ignored it in favor of the more important news that he was about to impart. Naruto. Jiraiya started solemnly, making sure said boy would pick up on the serious tone. The aforementioned Naruto quickly took note of the attitude in their conversation and so forced himself to focus in taking great care to hear his teacher's next worldly advice. Jiraiya may have been one to spout nonsense, especially when concerning matters of the flesh, but he was still a pretty darn good teacher, when it counted, and an even better ninja. I had seen your dismal performance just now. Jiraiya continued. Naruto racked his brains. He had conjured Kakashi-sensei's latest training exercise that was in conjunction with a mission, but he didn't think he did that bad. It was D rank after all, and most D rank missions didn't even require brain activity. Training wasn't that bad, Ero Sennin. Naruto defended himself with a shrug. I didn't mean your training, Naruto. With a closed fist, Jiraiya bopped the young boy on the head, who flinched and rubbed the sore spot. I meant your technique. The white-haired man pointed out, striking out a pose of one pointing towards the sky and beyond. My technique. Naruto wondered what in the world the old man was talking about. Had he gone senile? Correction. More senile. Yes. In fact, I've more or less written a manual to help you out. Jiraiya reached into his robes and retrieved a worn book. Though it's unfinished, I'm sure it ought to cover a hopeless cause like you. You'll definitely find a use for it. The frog sage stated, handing the book over to Naruto. Naruto accepted it with open arms, completely excited at the premise. The book clearly looked like a sort of prototype. Weathered looking, leather bound, scratchy pages, no title. Who knows what kind of impressionable wonders this book could hold? Then Naruto opened the book. Single Ninja on the Town. The Single Male Shinobi Guide to Woo the Kunoichi of Their Dreams. By Arc. Naruto read the title aloud. It was the end of the day when one dead tired Uzumaki Naruto burst through his own apartment door. He'd been rejected by his teammate and love interest Haruno Sakura no less than 8 times today. A new daily record if he ever bothered counting tabs. Taking a seat at the kitchen table, he sighed audibly, lamenting if he only knew what he was doing wrong. Then he'd happened to eye his paperweight for the pile of open scrolls he'd left there earlier. In fact, a handful of days earlier. The paperweight had been Jiraiya's training manual. Thinking back to when he'd received it and read the cover, the blonde-haired ninja recalled the pervert hermit had gone on to claim that this guide would help shinobi men everywhere with their love lives. However, when the elderly ninja was on his way to have the book edited, he had witnessed his own students' poor and lacking ability in these matters, and thus he, being that self-proclaimed generous and venerable master, took it upon himself to give his student the beta copy, so as to benefit from the experience before other shinobi males take their chances. Obviously Naruto didn't take well to the idea of a manual being written by a pervert, and thus the book had received its appointed paperweight status. Hey, I found a use for your book all right. Naruto snickered, enjoying the private joke to himself. Then he tore his eyes away and had his head propped up by an arm, focusing on more pressing recent matters at hand, like, say, what's for dinner? However, his imagination had decided to interfere. A brief daydream of eyebrows reading the book and suddenly having Sakura by his side had Naruto gasp aloud. In fact, the idea had been so disturbing that when the blonde member of Team 7 woke from his lapse, allowing his eyes to focus on the item solely in his field of vision. Somehow, whilst his mind wandered, his gaze unconsciously retraced itself back to the weary book. On seeing it, Sakura-chan's smiling face briefly flitted his thoughts. But Naruto looked away. Ero Sennin was not to be trusted with matters of the heart. Look where it got him. A lonely, perverted old man. And to think he wrote a book on love. Utterly ridiculous. It was only after the 9th unconscious staring, did Naruto reach over to satisfy his curiosity. Though Jiraiya did write a book on love, therein lay a piece of logic the Uzumaki male could encounter. Considering the older man's terrible luck with women in the first place, in theory, it would work well to do the opposite of what the pervert did. So Naruto opened the book. Turning to the page after the title, he found an index. Surprised that his teacher went through the trouble of even including a list of contents, Naruto had to ponder if his teacher really does think his material to be good enough to publish and possibly aid others in, Jiraiya's words, their as of yet unsuccessful love lives. Oh well, I don't think I got trouble with the rest this stuff. I'll just skip right to dating. Naruto said aloud to himself. Thinking that he knew more than enough to do for Sakura, the whiskered male figured he warranted the right to the chapter he'd likely need help in. Flipping volumes of pages aside, he'd just missed the dating chapter and started backtracking when he halted in mid-turn. Biting his lower lip, Naruto's shaky hand closed the book. There were additional chapters that his teacher didn't list, or rather did, but was in a hurry to cover up. Stuff that comes after dating. Stuff that comes when he's older. Naruto quickly shook his head to clear it of the weird things he'd seen. Okay. Naruto held the book at arm's length, like he'd done to that Madame Shijimi's darlingly insanely rabid pet cat. Then he opened it to a random page that wasn't past the dating chapter. A sigh of relief. There weren't any out-of-place fan service images. In fact, the other pages were illustrated appropriately for their chapters. Let's start from the start then. Naruto resolutely decided. If the start isn't good, then I can give the book back and tell him to make it less like himself. Forward. In this day and age, the regular male shinobi is considered to be a heartless tool. But this is a falsehood. The regular male shinobi must hold close their glass heart lest they will be overwhelmed. It is because of this reason that they need an equally strong female shinobi to keep them strong and be able to keep up with them. And so comes this guide. Though aimed at the male ninja audience, this is a solemn reminder that male and female shinobi should know that life is precious and that everything shouldn't be taken lightly. Only through trial and error, hardship and experience, will shinobi eventually learn the 3 unsaid laws. But since love is fleeting and most reverently desired in youth, thus the rules shall be repeated here so that others may not realize it too late. Live to learn to love to live. Hold close to these 3 ideals, for this does not only apply to male shinobi, but also kunoichi. All ninja have the same needs, hopes, realities and dreams and will need these 3 rules to catch a kunoichi to never let go. Imagine that. Naruto scratched at his chin. The old pervert sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He paused on the page and ran a single finger down the opening paragraph, stopping at a certain point. Live to learn to love and love to live. Naruto murmured. He turned the page. End prologue. All ninja have the same needs, hopes, realities and dreams and will need these 3 rules to catch a koi to never let go. Did you catch the change? This was really a pun, but most people wouldn't understand it and I didn't want to put in unnecessary Japanese either. Koi means either carp or love depending on how it's used. At least, I hope I spelled it correctly. I wanted to use live to learn to love and love to live as a derivative for the title. But I realized that it sounded more romance-y and not humorous. First impressions are very important. In fact, first impressions can be the whole determining factor in starting a relationship. Anything less than impressed and it would instantly be a tough road. Now the maximum effect to achieve a first impression can be done a number of ways. But here's the biggest main point for the single ninja. The flashy entrance. Use something awe-inspiring, breathtaking and generally all-round explosive when introducing yourself. The male happens to be a shinobi and should have a vast array of skills to take advantage of. Then follow it up with ninja talk. Types of weapons preferred, blood limits, techniques. Anything. Remember, first impressions are very important. Naruto had paused to consider the chapter and take a sip of his milk. However, a mere glance at the clock had him spray that milk all over the table. I'm late. Disclaimer. In Soviet Russia, you own Naruto. Over here, Naruto owns you. Single Ninja on the Town. By Arc. Chapter 1. Impressions. Subtitle. Hinata's Prerogative. Yo. Sakura was going to point her finger at her teacher and proclaim him late when she felt that something was odd. The sun hadn't reached the apex it normally was when Kakashi usually arrived. So she glanced at her watch. She halted unbelievingly. She tried again. Kakashi gave a wave of his hand in a gesture for her to continue and then returned to politely waiting patiently. You're on time, she remarked, unable to believe her own words. Sasuke even sat up, unbelievingly. Relatively on time. The pink-haired genin corrected herself. The statement rang true. Team 7's eternally late Junin teacher had been nearly on time for once. Only this euphoric realization did not become a cause for celebration when Kakashi only found 2/3 of his team present. Where's Naruto? Kakashi glanced this way and that, and I searched for a particular painfully bright set of colors ever found on a ninja. The female rookie scanned around wondering that too. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythmic tapping of her foot, otherwise an extension of Sakura's sorely pushed patience. Tap tap tap. Her brows furrowed just as her scowl deepened. The rhythm had steadily increased. Tap 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 tap. The tapping was now as incessant as a woodpecker. Silence. The calm before the storm. Where the hell is he? Kakashi said nothing, though his visible eye had been trained on a certain location in the distance. Then there was an incoming blur. The Junin's hand flashed and had caught it in midair. It happened to be a kunai with a smoke bomb attached. Sakura's eyes had widened at the sight of it. Sasuke raised an eyebrow in curiosity and Kakashi had been unfazed but blinked in virtual interest. Once the smoke started to spread, the teacher tossed the distraction to the ground. It was probably a ridiculous sight that a crowd of Naruto shadow replications had marched through the smoke with the real Naruto lying spread eagle on top of them. The only thing missing would have been some fanfare with trumpets and a catchy beat. The remainder of Team 7 could not find the will to say anything, as the crowd had deposited Naruto safely and soundly before disappearing in their own puffs of smoke. It was at this time that all the smoke dispersed and Naruto posed, catching the sun's rays just right. Hey guys! He exclaimed dramatically, teeth, hair and clothes sparkling under the sun. You're late. As is expected of the dead last. You're later than I am, Naruto. All sentiments rang out at the same time. Though varied in their volume, it was clear that their amused and annoyed enthusiasm was on the same level. Naruto gave a disheartened look to Sakura, who apparently didn't find his entrance to be a big deal. In fact, she looked downright angry. He quickly shifted his gaze to the other member of Team 7. Sasuke merely glared, but a hint of an amused smirk lined his face. It wasn't an expression that said, "I'm laughing with you," per se, more like, "I'm laughing at you." Naruto shot a glare back before settling on Kakashi warily. It came as quite the surprise that his teacher had managed to show up early. Well, admittedly earlier than later. Or actually, earlier than himself. So Naruto did the only thing he could think he could do. He told the truth. "I was reading a book and lost track of time," he explained to his team, scratching the back of his head in an embarrassed fashion. "Liar. Idiot. I totally understand where you're coming from." This time, the replies weren't so simultaneous. Sakura adapted a heated stare and Sasuke only gave a passing look at their teacher. However, the moment of distaste gave way and both genin shifted their attention back on Naruto again. Sakura folded her arms, disbelieving of the blonde boy's admission. "I'd believe that from anyone but you. I bet you went and gorged on ramen," she accused, searching for telltale signs of her guesses, like miso on his breath. "Nah, he's telling the truth." The cycloptic Junin defended his student. "It happens to me all the time." Then all of his students gave him the evil eye and Kakashi wished he didn't do what he just did. That is, not when I have to be here. With my team." He poorly attempted to cover his slip-up. "We have a mission," he declared, pointing towards the horizon and starting on his trek, narrowly avoiding his team's combined wrath. Sakura's eyes shifted to the corner of her vision, as she watched the dark-haired boy methodically and efficiently pull weeds out of the garden. A light blush lit her face as she sighed wistfully, mind somewhere pondering on some very important things. Uchiha Sakura. Oh, how she loved the sound of that. Though, Haruno Sasuke also had a nice ring to it. Nice ring to it. Ha, she sighed dreamily again. A shadow then covered her vision and she looked up to see a Naruto standing with his hands on his hips, grinning a storm. She was going to berate him for his lack of work ethic, when suddenly his stomach suddenly exploded and another Naruto appeared by spear diving through the former. Blamf. Sakura-chan. Gah. Completely taken by surprise, Sakura recoiled back and landed hard on her behind. Naruto winced at her reaction. He was hoping to get another lick at a first impression, so he intended to surprise her. Oh, he'd surprised her all right. Idiot. Sakura shouted as she bore down on him. Wham! The rest of the day had Sakura mark as one of the worst days in her life. On some ridiculous notion, Naruto had sprung surprise after surprise on her all day and each time she'd flailed and ended up in a ridiculously compromised manner like stumbling into nearby bushes or falling into the stream. However, she didn't mind the one where she jumped straight into Sasuke's arms. Though he'd dropped her immediately when he'd realized the situation. In fact, Naruto had surprised her so much, that by midday, she'd become immune to his stupid attempts and she'd cut out the middle man entirely by, instead of panicking, throwing a punch his way every time he appeared. After the 8th or so punch, Naruto backed off, finally learning the lesson that Sakura would probably be long past the introducing stage of their relationship and that he should just read and put into practice the next chapter tomorrow. Or whenever he healed. Or whenever she stopped punching him on sight. The blonde genin rubs his cheek painfully at the thought, when he unintentionally catches a hint of movement from behind him. Hinata. And it was indeed so. Since the academy, one Hyuga Hinata had looked up to the courage and perseverance at any task that she'd seen Uzumaki Naruto throw himself in. However, because of circumstance involving both her timid nature and their mutual social standing, she'd only admire him from afar. This behavior continued and even now, the present day, Hinata's still in awe at the blonde boy's dedication. Today, however, caught her attention as she'd witnessed the various mishaps her blonde idol happened to deal with. Feeling sorry for the Uzumaki, the Hyuga heiress took it upon herself to present her idol with a salve that would help with the fruits of his labor of the current afternoon. However, her reserved and shy nature had stopped her from approaching him. At least up until she got caught. The aforementioned timid girl gave a little eep at his catching her in the act of following him. Her feet acted on their own and froze up, leaving the girl completely open to the blonde boy's sights. She could only look away, terribly embarrassed at being caught openly staring and stalking. In a friendly sense. Hey Hinata-chan. He greeted her once he jogged up to her. Hi Naruto-kun. She stammered. Not being very good at small talk himself, nor being the type to do so, he jumped straight to the point as his approach to everything. What are you doing here? He asked, completely taking their coincidental meeting at face value. Hinata flustered, before her hand reached into her thigh holster and rummaged for a particular object she had in mind. I saw Sakura hitting you pretty often today. She stammered, retrieving a small jar and offering it to the orange-clad boy. Naruto recognized the salve immediately from during the Chunin preliminaries, took it graciously and began applying it liberally to his arms and face. Hey thanks, Hinata-chan. This stuff works wonders. He laughed appreciatingly. The white-eyed girl gave a small smile and mumbled "You're welcome." When he'd finished and handed the jar back to her, she finally went to ask what had been bothering her. Sakura-san seems pretty upset with you today. Did something happen? She asked. Naruto chuckled and waved her off. Nah, I've just been trying to get Sakura-chan to notice and like me. Oh, yeah, she's noticed me alright. But I think I need to work on the liking part, I see. To Naruto, there was a companionable silence, as his thoughts flit on Sakura and various hearts and a bubbly backdrop filled his mind. To Hinata, she'd felt like the world upped and died. Being more knowledgeable on social etiquette, the Hyuga heiress attempts to politely continue the conversation from the silence it had lapsed into. Are you going to try again soon, then? Yeah, nothing keeps me down, Hinata. Your determination is admirable, she whispers, her head held low as she saddened at the prospect. You should always keep your goals in your sights, Hinata. Naruto suddenly states. She looks up alarmed, but he's still smiling at her with his oblivious expression. Her next choice of words are far beyond being regal or ladylike for a person of her stature. I said you should always keep sight of your goals, Hinata. Never give up on what you do. If you believe it enough, you will get there. I know I'll be Hokage someday and I'll always strive to that day. Hinata released a breath she didn't know she was holding and looked on him with doe-like eyes. If you believe it enough, you'll get there. She murmured under her breath, repeating what Naruto just said. She'd taken his words to heart. The logic behind the words held true. All she had to do was just ask him if maybe she could be a person special to him. Naruto was a kind boy and surely he'd give her a chance. She couldn't lose Naruto to Sakura if she didn't have Naruto in the first place. Whilst Hinata worked on the courage to ask the blonde boy out, Naruto was wondering why in the world the shy girl had suddenly zoned out on him. He'd got up to invading her personal space and waving a hand in front of her face, when her own hand had suddenly flew up in a determined fist. Yikes! He yelped, backing up. Naruto-kun, Hinata stated determinedly, looking towards the shocked boy, completely missing the events just prior to now. Why yeah, Hinata. And now the hurdle. Or why you going to be FFF? It was like pushing a boulder larger than yourself up a vertical slope. FFFFFF. She stammered like a failing lawnmower. No, more graceful than that, a garden sprinkler. What is it, Hinata? What is it, girl? Naruto jumped up and down concerned. FFFFFF. She looped, still unable to get around the word. Fierce. Fired up. Flaccid. Hinata blushed at that one frog. Am I a frog? Did Hanabi fall down the well again? Though if ever asked why he said that last one, he wouldn't know for the life of him. FFFFF. She shook her head at his questions, still trying to get around this word. Though her mind was screaming, free, the word is free, but it just wasn't exiting her tongue as if it was stuck dealing with customs trying to explain those odd prescription tablets. I know this word, Naruto exclaimed punching his open palm, though he'd actually completely lost the point. It's that bastard, Neji, isn't it? He went and foo. Hinata's eyes widened and her word finally came out. Free. Free this Wednesday. Naruto naively tilted his head to the side. Am I free this Wednesday? Unable to trust her mouth, Hinata nodded mutely. Naruto tapped his chin and grimaced. I dunno, Hinata. He hesitated and she started deflating. I'm not the sort to sell myself, let alone give me around for free. If Hinata was the type of girl to slap her forehead, she would have and then some. But being demurely brought up in a very formal household did not afford such small trivialities. I meant, are why you doing anything for lunch on Wednesday? She asked. When Naruto opened his mouth to reply, Hinata went on to elaborate. Aside from eating, I mean. She added exasperatedly. Naruto nodded, his eyes flicking to the corner considering it. Well, aside from lunch, I guess I'm not doing anything. His tongue lapped his lips unconsciously at the thought of ramen. Stealing her resolve, Hinata pushed forth the big question. Would why you like? Wait. Naruto interrupted, his face dawning with comprehension. Isn't it this Wednesday when Ichiraku does a ramen sale? Yes. So would YUL like to eat tea together? Hinata shakily nodded and attempted to continue. If it's this Wednesday, then looks like I'll be busy over at Ichiraku's then. Sorry, Hinata. He sheepishly scratched the back of his head whilst apologizing. The pale-eyed girl immediately wilted as her resolve had all been used up. She'd been so close to asking him out. Well, looks like I'll just have to help you with your training some other time, He assumed offhandedly. Hinata's head picked up at that. Training. Training meant spending time with Naruto. How about Friday, huh? Say at 4. He asked. My team training area. The stricken Hyuga heiress nodded slowly. Training was practically a date as well. This was good. Anyways, I gotta get going. Naruto started off in a direction his stomach was pulling. Let's do lunch sometime. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, as the spectacle came to a close. His student had finally started taking his advice and he'd thought the kid was a goner after several times being turned down, though more like, knocked down literally. However, the number one most surprising ninja had indeed lived up to his namesake when he'd started speaking with the Hyuga girl. Jiraiya scratched his chin contemplating, before he'd retrieved a leather-encased book, opened it to a certain page and started writing. Single Ninja on the Town, Amendments. Amended Chapter 1. Impressions. Of course, most kunoichis also appreciate normalcy and should probably not be reminded of their jobs. Thus the second option should work better. The simple approach. Make eye contact, take the initiative and walk over and say, hi. Then follow it up with either small talk and/or an invitation out for coffee. This bout of normalcy will suffice and thus the simple approach would work far more favorably than a flashy entrance. After all, who likes a show-off? Naruto had been trying to approach Sakura throughout the day, but hadn't been successful. Thanks to his ill-thought ploy, she still reflexively hit him each time he announced his presence to her today. So Naruto had thought up a very cunning plan that would surely catch Sakura's attention and he could show her how nice he can be. An interlude in training was announced and the team was getting ready to move out on their own. Sasuke had shot down Sakura again and now comes Naruto's request to eat out with him. Let's go out today, Sakura-chan. Just me and YURK. Wham! Sakura turned around to address Naruto the usual way. Said male was belted across the face and the sheer force had him drag his face along the dirt until he came to a stop at her feet. The pink-haired genin was just about repeat how she preferred Sasuke over him, like she did every other day, when she'd realized something was amiss. Naruto had been belted and had come to a stop at her feet. Meaning that she had belted him from several feet away. In fact, she apparently still standing a few feet away from herself. The Sakura clone gave a wave before disappearing in a puff of smoke. The real Sakura immediately recognized it as a doppelganger using transform and turned her attention back to Naruto lying at her feet. He slowly craned his neck to look up at his chosen girl. Well, got your attention, didn't I? He grinned weakly as various gravel fell away from his whiskered face. The stunt had caused Sakura to laugh aloud whilst shaking her head. Oh Naruto. She shook her head. Only he would do such a thing to catch anyone's attention. Then the thought had caused her to think about the last couple of days and her expression turned a little somber. I've been hitting you for no good reason over the last couple of days, haven't I? She offered him a helping hand up. You know how to keep me in line. Naruto admitted, getting to his feet with Sakura's aid. The comment caused her to smile. But suspecting the stalling, she went to cut through the chase. I'm still not going out with you, Naruto. Well, I don't really feel like going out anyway. He shrugged. She gave him an odd look. Oh, so what do you feel like then? Naruto shrugged again and went over to the bridge railings and pulled himself to sit on top of them. How about to just talk? He suggested. Just talk? She scoffed, following to lean on the rails opposite to Naruto. And just what will we talk about, Naruto? Birthdays. Blood types. Favorite food. March 28th. Type O. And pickled plums. He'd recited, looking over to the flowing water beneath him. Sakura blinked. What? Naruto turned her way and shrugged. Your birthday's on March 28th. Your blood type is O. And I'm not sure about your favorite food, but you used to bring pickled plums lots of times at the academy before you started only on salads and weird fruity diets. He made a face at the last one. Sakura was more than a little surprised. He'd just about gotten all of it right. She was starting to feel a little creeped out that he'd gone so far as watch her all the time. Are you some sort of stalker or something? She asked, already beginning to push off the rails and make some space between them. Nah. He jumped off from where he sat. I just mostly listen to whatever you say to the jerk, 'cause, you know, we're a team and stuff. Sakura rolled her eyes, but couldn't help be taken aback. He probably knew much more about herself from just watching her than what she knew of him. And the extension of what she knew about him was him graduating at the bottom of the academy, his love for ramen and his goal to become Hokage. Displeased at this thought, Sakura furrowed her brows and turned away from her blonde teammate. You off now, Sakura-chan? He asked. A little disappointment seeped into his question as he strode up beside her. Don't wanna talk anymore then? Deciding that it probably was the best course of action, Sakura agreed. Well, I'll be seeing you at training again after lunch, Naruto. Now if you don't mind, I think I'd like to have something to eat before then. She said whilst starting to wander away, him following her of his own accord. You ought to get your ramen while you can. She said just as she passed the street he'd need to turn into to head to Ichiraku. See you later then, Sakura-chan. Naruto bade farewell and began on his way. Oi Naruto. Then a few moments later, her voice calling him from a little further back. I like pickled plums but it's not my favorite. The blonde genin grinned in response and then disappeared around the fence. Naruto visibly grimaced, his face set in determination. He'd been rereading the second chapter again but this time, had a dictionary scroll on loan from the local ninja library, which was odd, because someone felt they needed to create a dictionary in a scroll with a search function, which though minorly ninja affiliated, still should not have been put among ninja literature. He was just about to locate the elusive word, chivalrous, when someone had interrupted his thoughts. Never would have thought I'd find you reading, Uzumaki. Naruto looked over and found it was Yamanaka Ino, seated a few seats away, who'd addressed him. With her only being remotely connected to his love interest, he didn't really pay her much mind. Yeah, well, I got to study, he said, before turning back to his research. You study? Ino snorted, failing to stifle a chuckle. She couldn't picture Naruto and study in the same sentence. He'd given her a dry look and pulled out his dictionary scroll for closer scrutiny. Upon seeing the dictionary scroll, the Yamanaka daughter stopped, completely mistaking it for a ninja dictionary scroll, one that has explanations for all associated ninja terms. Well, I'll be darned. You really are studying, ain't ya? A disbelieving smirk played on her features. Naruto nodded, only half paying attention to the platinum blonde. So, what are you looking at? She leaned over to see what he was reading so intently. Naruto snapped the scroll shut, effectively halting his progress in learning what chivalrous meant yet again, and closed the manuscript Jiraiya had peddled on him. He faltered. It's nothing really. You know, ninja hush hush stuff. His choice of words had Ino laugh out loud. Ninja hush hush stuff. Ha ha. Then she'd playfully tap the side of her nose, conspiratorially amused. Naruto flushed embarrassed at his ridiculous choice of words. Even he had a standards towards this kind of stuff. Quickly trying to turn the situation his way, he turned to the Ichiraku owner and ordered a bowl of miso ramen and a bowl of prawn and pork ramen. No thanks, Naruto. Ino declined loudly, when she heard him order. I'm on a diet. Don't order for me. Wasn't for you. He rolled his eyes at her assumption. The female of Team 8 huffed and looked away with as much dignity as she could muster, ending their interaction. It wasn't long before Naruto's orders came up and he'd readied his chopsticks. He was about to dig into the miso, when he'd caught Ino glancing longingly at his lunch. Noting with surprise that she had only ordered tea for herself, it came as a surprise to both of them what he did next. He'd had the cook pass his bowl of prawn and pork over to Ino. When Ino denied ordering anything, the cook had pointed in Naruto's direction, who'd given her a friendly salute before starting to dig into his miso. Feeling indignant at Naruto's charity, the kunoichi brought over the bowl and placed it back next to him. Look Uzumaki, I can't eat this stuff. It'll ruin my diet for the week. She complained. Hey, just eat it, okay? I mean, we're going back to training afterwards, so you'll need as much energy as you can. He tried to rationalize his decision. Ino was about to rebuke when her stomach beat her to it. Growl. Naruto none too discreetly grinned into his bowl, before bringing more noodles to his mouth. Defeated, Ino took a seat next to Naruto and daintily started on her meal. Before her own chopsticks could raise the noodles to her mouth, however, she'd taken a notice of Naruto's manners and gave him a mortified look. Do you have to be so sloppy? He looked up, noodles still in mid-inhale. HRMPHL. And don't talk with your mouth full. The blonde boy swallowed, albeit quieter, then proceeded to scratch the back of his head with a broad grin. Hee, sorry, Ino. He timidly laughed. She responded with an approving smile, before returning her attention to her own bowl. A companionable silence set in as each sedately went about enjoying their meals, their private thoughts. It wasn't long before Naruto finished before pondering on another order when Ino decided then and there to speak aloud on the formings of something she couldn't pin in her mind. You know Uzumaki. Ino stirred the contents of her bowl. You're all right. She didn't mean for it to have a wistful tinge, but she certainly hoped he wouldn't take it the wrong way. She didn't know what to make of it herself, really. All Hokages got to be good guys, right? He warmly smiled in response. Though not looking at him, Ino caught the smile he gave her and she couldn't help but smile into the broth herself. Well, I'm done. He stood whilst giving a light stretch, getting ready to return the scroll. He was worried about the ninja library's policy, where if their books were to disappear, the book gets a trip out for the day before librarian Anbu track it down. Frankly, there was no other method to loan books and they followed the strict rule that, if you couldn't sneak it out, you don't deserve to read it. So far, Kakashi had the longest running record of 7 years on the first signed edition of Ika Ika Paradise, Volume 1. His fine is still rising. Anyways, places to go. A ninja's work is never done. The orange-clad rookie yawned. Then he'd paused as he suddenly remembered something. Hey Ino, do you remember what Sakura-chan usually likes to eat? He asked curiously. The blonde girl tilted her head cutely and responded after thinking it over. Anmitsu, I'm pretty sure. Receiving a blank look, she went on to explain exasperatedly. It's that sort of jelly and syrup. Sometimes it's got fruits. She gestured, her pointed finger making a circling motion. Naruto's mouth curved into an O shape and he nodded, digesting the information and vaguely remembering a relevant dish from the recesses of his memory. So why'd you want to know that? You aren't going to prank her, are you? She gave the boy an accusing look. Inwardly, Naruto grimaced. He'd never do such a thing to his beloved Sakura-chan. He was about to reply, but ever quick on the uptake, thought better and instead tapped the side of his nose. Ninja hush hush. He fought back a grin. Ninja hush hush, Ino said dryly. She smiled but she found the joke to be wearing thin. Naruto wasn't the mysterious type at all, so this little bit of oddity was very clashing. Folding her arms, Ino went on to ask half-jokingly. And I suppose you aren't going to tell me where you're going, considering training doesn't resume for a while yet. Definitely ninja hush hush. He laughed, not even giving his answer a thought through. This time, the reply hadn't been taken so well. Ninja hush hush. PFF'd. She held up a fist menacingly. Realizing his error too late, Naruto held up his hands and tried to apologize profusely as Ino advanced on him, all to no avail as she threateningly closed the distance between them. Right when she got within striking distance, he'd lowered his head and closed his eyes waiting for the hit to come. When none came, he'd cautiously opened them to find Ino's fist was still held out towards his forehead, her face decked with a cheeky grin. Then she'd playfully gave his head a tap. That's for flinching. She giggled. Appreciating a good joke even on him, Naruto laughed too. Then they both exchanged farewells and he exited. It was only some minutes after that Hinata entered. She'd scanned the establishment but didn't find the person she was looking for. Oh darn. She sighed. The timid girl was about to exit when Ino called out and pulled her over. Looks like you were looking for someone, huh? Ino asked. Why yes, but he's not here anymore. The white-eyed girl sighed. Him, huh? Who were you looking for? Ino asked curiously. The Hyuga heiress blushed and stammered some excuses, but Ino reviewed the time she was here and made an educated guess. Were you looking for Naruto? The blue-eyed girl asked. Naruto had been the only male patron she knew that came in today. Hinata squeaked and looked away hurriedly, her face turning a deeper shade of red than it currently was. You are looking for Naruto? Ino exclaimed in surprise. You just missed him. Oh. Hinata wilted. Ino's eyes lingered on Hinata's expression and she'd quickly made some connections. Thinking that it was too good an opportunity to pass up, the platinum blonde then proceeded to order a bowl of ramen for her friend. Well, there'll be other times, right? Ino said, handing the bowl over. I guess. I will be training with him on Friday. Unable to decline, Hinata accepted the offer and began motions to eat. Friday, you say? I can help you out if you want. Ino volunteered enthusiastically. Oh. Hinata realized too soon that her polite nature had just invited someone into her alone with Naruto time. Yeah, I'll make sure nothing goes wrong. The Yamanaka daughter jabbed a thumb at her chest. You can count on me. But that's not nieces. The poor Hyuga girl tried to reassure her friend that she'd be fine, but unfortunately had been interrupted and the topic was shifted. Hey, Ino tactically interrupted, snapping her fingers just as she recalled something she'd forgotten. Do you remember when Naruto painted the Hokage monument? That was hilarious. The old fogies up there are so serious, it was finally time someone did something about it. Hinata blushed and replied that she thought it was humorous too. Though Hinata started reluctantly, it wasn't long before both girls ended up laughing and blushing at some of their memories concerning a certain orange-clad loudmouth who, with each story shared, was seemingly becoming capable of reaching such great heights. When the two girls finally parted ways, Ino had reflected on what little she did know about Naruto in comparison to the vivid pictures Hinata appeared to paint the blonde boy in. She had to accept that he was no Sasuke, but surely if Hinata saw something and Ino herself caught a glimpse of. Quickly forcing that line of thought out of her mind, Ino turned back on the safer pretense of Naruto's aid earlier. Rationalizing that she wasn't one to just accept charity out of the blue like that, Ino promised herself that she owed the hyperactive ninja a favor. As a result, her training that day was visibly lacking, but she had already kept in mind ways on how she could pay him back. Jiraiya pulled his head back down into the booth he was seated in and started writing again. Lucky little brat. A few more years and he's going to have a following. Just like his old man. Then Jiraiya growled as his pen increased speed as it tore through page after page. And I never get that kind of attention without paying for it. After a few calming breaths, he put away the notepad and began writing in a leather-bound book. The kunoichi should be more comfortable with the male shinobi. Thus, a request to the kunoichi to train together shouldn't be a problem. Though not technically a date, it is rather close and can be classified as an impromptu date. If the male shinobi has gotten here, then they should congratulate themselves. They are now very close to wooing their desired partner, as this is physical proof that the female is willing to trust the male with her life. This part is a rather simple concept. The male shinobi should approach the kunoichi, engage in conversation and steer it towards training. Once so, ask if they can train together. On acceptance, the male shinobi should take it easy on the kunoichi. Since the likelihood for the female shinobi is either a genjutsu user or a medic ninja, the male shinobi should not try to overdo their counterparts, lest they make them feel vulnerable. Once the sparring goes for an appropriate duration, it can be concluded in two ways. Take a non-threatening hit and fake an injury. Fight until both parties are tired and surrender, admitting you are too tired to continue. Well, I guess that's true. Naruto mumbled naively. All the women he knew had counted under Jiraiya's chauvinistic definition. However, he had forgotten to consider a certain weapons specialist, a fan-using sand sibling and a blood-lusting once-snake apprentice. And thanks to this particular irony, the chances of him meeting all three, within the next few days, rose remarkably. Disclaimer. In Soviet Russia, you own Naruto. Over here, Naruto owns you. Single Ninja on the Town. By Arc. Chapter 3. Training. Subtitle. Clash of the Tenten. Eager to give his next piece of advice a try, Naruto waited until the completion of the day's D-rank mission before implementing what he'd learned. Sakura-chan. Naruto called out. I'm not going out with you, Naruto. Sakura replied on schedule. No, no, no. He waved his hands out in front of him. Being quick to denial had Sakura settle him with a questioning gaze and a hand on her hip. What? You want to just talk again? She tilted her head to the side, an amused smile crossed her face. Nah, I wanna spar, Naruto replied, bouncing up and down from one foot to the other. Sakura scrunched her face at the thought. Spar? You choose the rules, Sakura-chan. Naruto grinned at the prospect. Why in the world do you want to spar now? She groaned. We just finished a D-rank mission and I just want to go home and wash up. I'm going to be Hokage sometime, Sakura-chan. I need to learn how to fight against all different kinds of people. Naruto replied in earnest. Faye, I'm going home. The pink-haired genin dismissed him and started on her way. Desperate to get a spar with Sakura, he blurted the first thing that came to mind. A round of Anmitsu says you can't beat me. The shout had caused Sakura to stop. She turned her head slowly, her brows rose in curiosity. How did you know? She started to ask, if only slightly bewildered. Naruto kept his arms folded and continued grinning, hoping against all hope that he would get a spar in with the girl he likes. You game. Sakura fully turned around and cracked her knuckles. Who's to say I'm not one to turn down an invitation like that? She smirked. The female genin began to approach her blonde teammate and started laying down her rules. Restrictions are: no weapons in Academy Ninjutsu and Taijutsu allowed only. Anything else is instant disqualification, okay. She punctuated the question with moving into a combative stance. What? Naruto whined. That's not FA. He started to whine about how she outlawed his best stuff, but was cut off as he dodged a roundhouse kick aimed for his head, then backed off from the follow-up back kick with her opposite leg. His attempt to force distance and recover, however, had him on the receiving end of more attacks, as Sakura rushed in and pressed on, this time with a faster and fiercer barrage, not allowing her opponent an inch to recover. However, Naruto got his chance. Once the adrenaline started coursing through his veins, a grin covered his face and he spun into action. He brought in the first use of ninjutsu when Sakura next attacked and he'd been replaced with a log. An attack came from behind her and she'd replaced herself with a log as well. The battle went up a notch. A few minutes into battle, Sakura noticed that many of her blows didn't seem to be slowing Naruto down and she soon realized that he would outlast her with his astonishing amount of stamina. So she reduced herself to stealth, diversion and hit-and-run tactics. Her blonde opponent would eventually learn to watch his back. Naruto, though, played up front. He would purposely take attacks head-on and use it to be able to deliver some counter-attacks. However, his use of ninjutsu had been less than straightforward as he specialized in deceit quite well. His emerald-eyed opponent would soon learn not to take her eye off the log that Naruto replaced himself with. The battle had gone on and soon, Sakura was really tiring. Naruto didn't notice as he was enjoying their spar for so long that he'd forgotten what the book had said and was completely intending to take the win for himself. However, true to her intellect, Sakura managed to devise a plan at the last second and she put it into action when she managed to counter Naruto's parry and throw him towards a tree. Seeing the obstacle coming to meet him head-on, the orange-clad ninja spun himself in midair, so that his feet struck the trunk, absorbed the impact and prepared to push off to attack her again when. "You lose." Sakura laughed, pointing at him triumphantly. And he stopped at that. "What?" He quirked his head to the side in confusion. "Look at your feet," she pointed out. He looked down. He was sticking to the tree. So what? It's not like he didn't use anything he learned outside the arcade. Oh, he was sticking to the tree. He learned that from Kakashi-sensei. Damn. Naruto swore. He'd let the chakra stored in feet seep away, allowing him to extract himself from the tree and land safely at the base. Sakura giggled as the blonde boy sulkingly approached her. Her inner self had scolded her at being cheap for telling Naruto to stop from jumping at her, causing him to unconsciously stick to the tree, but she didn't dwell on it for long when she'd remembered that she'd soon be having a nice bowl of jelly and syrupy goodness. Besides, she rationalized, if he was just a little bit smarter, he would have at least tried to contest her underhanded ways. She still continued to giggle as he kept sulking when they were walking side by side towards a restaurant where she could receive her prize. "It's not so bad, Naruto." Sakura's melodic voice sang out in an attempt to lighten the mood. "You'll be in my presence as I enjoy my lovely hard-earned." Then it struck her. Seeing his teammate pause in mid-step, Naruto stopped too and turned to face her. The cotton candy-haired girl turned on him with an accusing finger. "You cunning little fox," she started, though a lopsided grin and cheerful attitude accompanied her odd choice of words. Naruto looked around confused and he pointed to himself with a scared and questioning look. "If you lose, you'd have to buy me Anmitsu. If I lose, I'd buy you Anmitsu," she accused. "Meaning either way, we'd actually be going out together," she concluded. "You were setting me up for a date." Naruto went up to scratch the back of his head and grinned with his eyes closed. He didn't really think of that. He was only actually trying to earn a spar out of her like the book told him, though this was sounding pretty awesome too. Sakura shook her head and rubbed her eyes, though a wry smile didn't move from her face. "Is there something wrong, Sakura-chan?" Naruto asked worriedly. "No, Naruto," she finally decided, straightening up with a casual smile. "I think I'll take a rain check today on that Anmitsu," she said and started heading in a different direction. "I think I'll be resting up for today, like I said I would." Naruto bid a quiet farewell, though when his love interest reached the next block, she turned to face him and called out. "Don't forget that you owe me though." Naruto nodded and waved. Once she was out of sight, he decided on a quick lunch before heading back to his team's meeting area. It was Friday and he'd made a promise to be training with Hinata today. Much to Hinata's dismay, her teacher, Kurenai had her stay behind after training to help the Hyuga heiress with various techniques. Much too polite to decline her teacher, Hinata had been training until her teacher was satisfied, and let her go, albeit borderlining late. So here she was, sprinting as hard as she can to meet Naruto for their training session, hoping against hope that he hadn't left yet. Hinata-chan. And being ever so polite, the Hyuga stopped to see who addressed her, further burning away at a fuse leading to her reserve storage of patience. Good afternoon, Ino-chan. Hinata said with a bow. You're going to meet Naruto now, right? The blonde girl asked excitedly. Yes. Hinata desperately wanted to move this along. Well, I'll come with you, like I said I would. The Yamanaka daughter grinned. Hinata forced a smile back. Somewhere in the back of her mind, an expletive was set off, destroying a block of reserved goodwill. Hinata nervously ran a hand through her violet locks. Well, I'm running a little late, so we'll have to run. Wonder what's taking Hinata so long. Naruto wondered. Checking his watch, he'd found that she was late by 10 minutes already. Hinata's not the type to be late. He pondered. I better go find her. On a spur decision, he decides to run over to her training area to see if she's still there. It was only a few scant moments when he left, that Hinata and Ino arrived. Damn, he's not here, Ino exclaimed. Hinata was too refined to murmur an obscenity, but she has been really close as of late. Maybe he's gone to eat. Maybe he went home, they both suggested at the same time. Ino brought a hand to her chin in serious contemplation. I think you're onto something, though we'll check his house afterwards. She said, eyeing the direction for Ichiraku since she didn't know where he lived, yet. Ichiraku's this way. Ino grabbed her pale-eyed partner's hand. Come on. They went the direction completely opposite the way Naruto left towards. In truth, Naruto honestly had no idea where Hinata's training ground was. But little details like that never stopped him before. It was at this point in his running, he accidentally tripped over a kunai that stuck face down in the ground. Damn, he managed to cry out before his mouth was filled with various foliage. Tenten had been collecting her weapons after a long grueling exercise she'd placed upon herself. Normally, she would be training with either teammate or teacher, but they were all predisposed of for some reason or another. Guy had been assigned a Junin mission. Lee was doing his rounds for another loss to a self-imposed rule. Neji had been assigned to certain family duty. So this left Tenten by herself to work on a certain technique of hers, namely, summon bundles of weapons at a time and then have them thrown in a blanketed swarm in a set area. In all, the technique was best against swarms of attacking ninja, as the area spread of her attack would definitely wound someone, especially if they were all clustered. Otherwise, it'd work in a pinch to at least tag a ninja that would try to escape from it. And right now, she was looking for the last kunai to store again when. Damn, a yelp in the direction of the woods nearby had her pause. She approached cautiously as the mumbled swearing grew louder. A familiar-looking spot of spiky hair had her grab the offending mop and pull on it hard, flinging the crouching genin out of the bushes and at her feet. OWWW! Naruto cried out, fiercely cradling his throbbing scalp. Tenten blinked. It was that loud Uzumaki boy who had defeated Neji in the finals. She started wondering what his business was here, but she couldn't help but smirk when she noticed him holding one of her kunai, to which she plucked out of his grasp and replaced it into its scroll. With the action done and her collecting task completed, she turned to address Naruto. What are you doing here? She asked expectantly, hands on hips. Were you spying on me? The orange-clad boy shook himself and looked up confused. This isn't Hinata's training area. Hyuga Hinata, right? She asked to clarify, to which he nodded. She only knew the former from her teammates' various rants about his cousin, though in her opinion, it could be constituted as an obsession and she personally thought that he was probably crushing on her shudder. No, this is the training area of T. She couldn't even get to saying her team number when he interrupted her. Who are you supposed to be, anyway? He pointed at her in sudden surprise. I haven't seen you around before. Are you a spy? No. I live around here. Tenten lost her composure. She made it to the third portion of the Chunin test. Why couldn't he remember her? My name's Tenten. Naruto slammed a fist into his open palm in recognition, effectively interrupting Tenten again, this time from introducing her last name. Oh, you're that weapons specialist girl. Tenten preened at being called a weapons specialist. Who lost to that fan girl? And Tenten slumped. She didn't want to be remembered for that. She knew she could have won if she wasn't mismatched with her worst possible opponent. Or maybe if she wasn't so foolhardy. You were alright in your fight though. Naruto shrugged, bringing his hands behind his head. The comment had her loss alleviate a little. I was better though. I beat Neji. He added inconsiderately, making Tenten slump further into depression. It was a sore point. Considering Neji was a possible unrequited crush, she wasn't even sure if he was even that, and that the Hyuga only trained with her for his own ends. It was an even bigger sore point, that Neji, as well as the rest of her team, treated her so delicately. How could she become a great ninja someday, if she wasn't getting the kind of training they did with each other? Granted, she didn't want to end up a smoking heap much like Lee ends up after challenging Neji, but she wanted her own share of bruises too. Not in any weird kind of way, mind you. Bruises to harden her up is all. Get her more battle ready and all that. And if it wasn't infuriating enough, Neji always defeated her. He never pushed her to her limits, rather pushed her away. With his Kaden the damn heavenly spin. And to think, this poor excuse of a ninja beat Neji. A burning desire erupted in her at the thought of such incompetence. She faltered. She faltered again. You asshole. Tenten snapped, a finger squarely locked on Naruto. That must have been a fluke. There's no way you could have beaten Neji. Naruto's defense died on his lips, as he decided to dodge Tenten's weapon offensive rather than mouth off and get skewered. Oh shit. Not again. The blonde complained at having to get into another fight with another female in such short amount of time. However, his dodge was cut short as he had to keep dodging in mid-dodge, as the weapons expert had thrown various weapons to areas just in front of him. And the game kept up as Tenten launched weapon after weapon at the frantically dodging Genin. I never miss a target, you know. She said casually, a smirk lighting her face. And I've had enough. Playtime's over. You're mine. Whilst Tenten opened up a new scroll altogether, Naruto gained his bearings. No way, I'm losing to you. He retorted. Multiple bursts of smoke dictated the creation of a sizable team of shadow replications to Naruto's aid. I gave you a chance to hide and all you do is make yourself more prominent. Tenten cut her thumb. I don't know how you could have ever passed the Genin exam. At this time, the hair-bund girl finished wiping her blood on the weapon summoning scroll and whipped it around her partially uncoiled like a gymnast's ribbon. Weapon after weapon appeared in existence and all were flung in Naruto's direction. Seeing the onslaught, the Naruto army picked up the many weapons on the battlefield and some attempted to defend themselves, while others threw some projectiles back. This move had deterred most of the flung weapons, but in the end, only one Naruto was still left standing from the rain of steel. A little surprised, Tenten went to quickly finish the job with one of her simpler but effective moves. She summoned and threw a Fuma Shuriken in his direction, and just as expected from anyone, Naruto included, the defender went to dodge the oversized blade. However, the shadow windmill had actually been a ruse that covered a kunai that she also threw. It arced in the direction he was heading, and just as expected, he took the hit. Or rather, he was supposed to. Any below average ninja would take the hit normally in the shoulder because they wouldn't see it coming. An above average ninja would not even try to dodge, but either deflect or take the hit in a less crucial area since it's a really base weapon and the damage can easily be minimized. But Naruto wasn't just any Joe ninja. He tried to dodge it, which put him back into the flight of the overly large shuriken. Tenten's aim was always perfect. The shuriken embedded itself into Naruto, causing the male shinobi to deviate from his lunge and ungracefully impact the ground with a sickening thud. Shit. Tenten swore. She never meant to go this far. He was supposed to take the kunai hit. Her thoughts panicked as she sprinted over to the fallen shinobi. Just as she reached him, her frantic eyes scanned his twitching form, as blood pooled everywhere. Shit. 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 Her panic rose, her hands covered her mouth. Naruto struggled to lift his head to look at his attacker. Gotcha. And with that triumphant grin of exclamation, he exploded in a puff of smoke. Tenten gasped, as a kunai embedded in the dirt transformed into the blonde ninja she was fighting and proceeded to tackle her to the ground. She realized he must have changed using the shadow replications as a cover. Soon, they were struggling in a fierce lock. Each attempt Tenten made to retrieve a weapon or scroll was thwarted, so she had to resort to base taijutsu and grappling. It became a roughhousing of punches, jabs, grabs, reversals and hair pulling as both combatants fought for dominance and their bodies tossed and tumbled in every direction. Tenten had to push for every taijutsu technique she learned in the academy, while Naruto went on to improvise on the fly with sloppy but effective returns. Eventually, their struggle had them inch towards the various weapons that lined the field and Tenten managed to wrap her hands around a dagger. It would have been the turning of the tides if it weren't for the fact that her hand was halted in place by a third party. Looking up, Tenten noticed a Naruto holding her hand back. Caught by surprise, she loosened her grip enough for the clone to remove the weapon and toss it aside. The distraction allowed Naruto to push Tenten over on her back. Kneeling on top of her, he propped his legs along her hips and used his weight to pin her from pushing him off. He then furthered it, by grabbing her hands and intertwined their fingers, halting her from being able to retrieve another weapon. Tenten struggled in a last-ditch attempt to take control, but when she'd scanned the field for the nearest weapon, she froze. I don't own that many katanas. Confusion tittered on realization. Naruto grinned as many of the weapons littering their battlefield turned into more doppelgangers. Tenten slumped, knowing she was defeated. Allowing herself to relax, the dark-haired genin's eyes unconsciously searched out her opponents as she assessed their battle. Though she lost, she knew he couldn't have been better off than her, especially when she had a couple of good hits and weapon nicks, as well as a precise knee to the groin once. And then she considered her present state. Her weapons were cluttering the field. She was thoroughly exhausted. Her breathing was haggard. She got the shit beaten out of her. Her hair was hanging freely as somehow her ties became a casualty. She got the shit beaten out of her. It was awesome. Tenten couldn't believe she actually had a good roughhousing with someone who wasn't afraid to hit a woman in the right context. She let out an exhilarated whoop followed by a laugh. Naruto, who was watching her reaction since she relaxed, looked on confused. She had just been staring at him for a minute or so, when out of nowhere she just burst out laughing. For some reason he couldn't quite fathom, he found himself joining in as well. When it started to die out into chuckles, Naruto slowly stood up and held out a hand for Tenten to take. She took it and was promptly helped to her feet. The wind picked up a little and her hair flailed. She pulled it back behind her head with one hand, never once breaking eye contact with her blonde opponent. That was a great fight. Tenten complimented, looking at Naruto in the eye intensely. She unconsciously decided he had deep sky blue eyes. Oh yeah, Naruto agreed, though he was idly wondering why she wasn't letting go of his hand. He'd consciously noted how she was looking at him a little weirdly too. Great fi, he started to say, before his face gained a somber expression and he pulled away roughly. Ah geez, I was supposed to be looking for Hinata for our training. He slapped his forehead in irritation. Got to find out why she was late. A little disappointed that he'd be leaving so soon, Tenten instead focused on the great feeling of the bruises and so merely stood and bid her sparring partner farewell. See ya, Naruto. Let's spar again sometime, she called out after his fleeing form. Bye Tenten. Will do, he called out behind him and waved a hand back as he sprinted away. Tenten was still staring after Naruto's back some minutes later with an elated smile on her face, when a certain duo ran up to her. It was Ino who pointed at the older girl and couldn't help but point out. You look like hell. Despite such an exclamation, the older girl didn't respond. Maybe we shouldn't bother her. Hinata erred on the side of caution. Ino fumbled for a name. Tina, Tenten, right. Finally, the hair-bun liberated girl blinked, as if for the first time noticing her audience. Yes, she responded, though still looking noncommitted to the exchange. Have you seen a loud blonde genin wearing orange? Says stupid things and claims to become the next Hokage. Came Ino's direct question. Naruto. Tenten blinked, suddenly giving the current blonde her full attention. Yeah, both younger genins exclaimed, though they internally winced at noticing how the older girl knew the person they were looking for by his first name. I was just sparring with him. Tenten couldn't stop a smile from blossoming on her face. The scumbag, Ino shouted. Hinata wasn't one to voice her concerns, but she thought it. Well, he rushed off a little while ago. I think he was looking for you. Tenten quickly defending her recent sparring partner and pointing at the Hyuga heiress. Weren't you supposed to meet him for training? That guy keeps on giving. Ino's attitude did a 180. Similarly, Hinata held a hand in front of her mouth for even doubting her idol. Let me help you guys out. Then Tenten remembered the mess of her weapons around her. After I get my stuff together. Hinata and Ino didn't really want another female helping them look for Naruto, so they managed to diplomatically talk Tenten into letting them search him out and the weapons using girl can find them afterwards. Jiraiya had been furiously writing into a notebook whilst muttering words such as pawn, pleasure, and leather under his breath. Damn you, Naruto, he growled. It was only supposed to be a push in the right direction, not to cause a friggin' avalanche. Once satisfied that he wrote enough into the notebook, he whipped out the leather-bound manuscript and started writing. The student teaching the master. PFF'd. Single ninja on the town, amendments. Amended Chapter 3. Training. Now, another way to earn a spar is the double standard bet. Simply bet lunch, preferably the chosen kunoichi's favorite dish, and the loser pay for it, and it gives added incentive for a spar and a date. Another way to finish the fight would be to use certain grapples to bring together the bodies of the male and female in close quarters. Anything relative where both faces are parallel to the other are highly recommended, but should not be used on the kunoichi if they are uncomfortable with the male shinobi just yet. Beware this technique, as hits below the belt become very frequent. The following is a list of possible finishers for that last paragraph. Naruto ambled along, kicking away various pebbles that dare crossed his path. Had Akamaru got in his way, he would have even given the canine a good punting. If he was thinking little more clearly, he would have used a shadow replication to kick his own head in. Yes, he was that disgruntled. Damn it. Naruto snapped at how poorly his meeting went. It started off well enough when he found Sakura. He professed that he'd made a poem for her, and despite her initial soft-spoken refusal, she eventually caved in and decided on humoring him by listening to it, quote unquote. It should be noted that she was smiling the entire duration of their exchange. And so, he stood straight, cleared his throat a few times and went on to recite his haiku, a poem that had 3 syllables in the first line, then 5 in the second and then 3 again in the last. Sakura is a cute girl, from Naruto. Needless to say, at its finish they both stood there looking blankly at each other for quite a while. The situation suffered an epileptic fit of ambiguous win and failings. But mostly failings. Watching Naruto's expectant face, Sakura realized that she's supposed to say something, and she begins with a grateful smile. It is clear that it's certainly forced and fractured. She blushed from both flattery and embarrassment for the both of them. The pink-haired genin also felt the urge to laugh, cry and get angry all at the same time. She barely managed to suppress all negative impulses and instead settles on giving him a pat on the back and a pity, "Thank you," to save face. At that point, it was more for her benefit than his. So here Naruto was, now wandering through the shopping district. He'd met adversity and its name was poetry. Thus he turned to something that he was doing quite well in so far. Presents. Just not actually wrapping it himself, of course. After raising false hopes on several different occasions in looking for that perfect gift for his Sakura-chan, Naruto would finally stumble across something. It's only too bad that it would count as a misadventure, as it's very much the wrong thing to give her. Hey, I can't help but see your crestfallen look, kid. An elder man commented at Naruto's slumped posture. Who? Me. The blonde genin glanced up alarmed, looking side to side to make sure it was he that was being addressed. The geriatric nodded and his cane spun in a flourish that indicated a possible showboat or ninja background. Possibly the worst of both. I bet it's woman troubles, isn't it? How did you know? Naruto gasped. An alligator grinned. Boy, do I have a deal for you. Are you sure about this? Sure. Girls just love this shit. Before long, Naruto found himself fleeced a large amount of money and earning a fancily gift-wrapped, velvet choker for his efforts. The heck? He turned the box over and over in his hand, still trying to come to grips with how he purchased it. Actually, he didn't know anyone who wears this sort of neckbind. Well, there was the exception of Haku, but he was a dude. I think Sakura's going to be upset with me for this. Naruto winced, and decided on not giving the odd gift to her. For once, he made the right decision consciously. At the same moment just further down the street, a certain duo were also taking a stroll to be out of hearing range from their sister. We've got to ditch her. Today's the last day for the book signing. Kankuro frantically wailed. We'll never hear the end of it from her if she finds out. Gaara of the desert looked over to his brother with a neutral stare. Don't give me that, Kankuro exclaimed, his face heating up at his brother's silence. You read Come violence like your life depended on it. The older boy accused. Gaara looked away. The older boy started fretting again, but paused when his brother spoke aloud. We will need a diversion. The younger Sand sibling stated concisely. Yeah, but how will? The puppet-using ninja started, before Gaara's open palm halted him in mid-question. The puppet user followed the sand user's gaze until it rested on a certain blonde Uzumaki who just happened to be strolling towards them down the opposite side of the block. Him. Kankuro tugged at the collar of his costume. Don't get hasty now, Gaara. He nervously said, whilst thinking back to his younger brother's battle with that specific ninja. He is our distraction. Gaara gave Kankuro a pointed look, as if daring his older brother to disagree. Wisely, Kankuro did not. Depending on your point of view, Naruto's day was about to either get better or worse. Hey, it's Naruto. A voice excitedly greeted the Leaf Ninja. The aforementioned male found himself on the receiving end of a pat on the back from a sand ninja in a black full-body catsuit. Wah, he mumbled, being caught off guard, immediately wondering where this show of friendliness suddenly came from. Naruto. Looking over to his other side, the blonde ninja found himself caught in Gaara's glare, effectively shutting up the poor Leaf Ninja. Look, we're in a bit of a bind here. Kankuro pulled Naruto closer with his arm around Naruto's shoulder in a friendly act of camaraderie. See, me and the bro want to go, drinking and stuff. Kankuro pointed a thumb over his shoulder at Gaara, then imitated downing a bottle with his other hand. The younger boy nodded slowly when Naruto briefly looked his way. And we don't want the sister hanging around, you know. Naruto gave the makeup-wearing ninja a confused look. A confused, but certainly a, not stupid, look. A guy thing. Gaara inserted when he noted that Naruto was not falling for their plan. A light bulb went off in Naruto's head. Not that it actually shone on anything, mind you. He'd just heard, guy thing, and being a guy, he felt the need to cooperate, despite the obvious discrepancies like the brothers not being of legal drinking age for one. Yeah, the puppet-using genin snidely took to it Gaara's suggestion. Just, I dunno, take our sister around the places you'd go. Show her around, let her buy that crap whatever girls buy. Before Naruto could protest them dumping their sister off on him, Kankuro desperately shoved several bills into the Leaf Genin's hand. With Naruto's penchant luck with money, he earned back all he spent on the collar and much more. Basically, we just want you to distract her for a bit and keep her away from a certain place. Kankuro summed up the proposition. Can I get ramen? Naruto asked permission for his first love, slowly becoming infatuated with the idea of being paid to do some of the things he wanted to do. Hell yeah, go nuts. And that sealed the deal. With the agreement made, Gaara and Kankuro bid their farewell as they went off to their own devices, leaving Naruto to stand at the entrance of a store waiting for a specific female citizen of the Hidden Sand to exit. Hey Kankuro, Gaara, you should see this. Temari started whilst exiting the store carrying a shopping bag. However, instead of finding her brothers, Temari had come across a certain genin of the Hidden Leaf. Hi, she greeted nervously, frantically searching for a sign of one of her siblings. Make no mistake, Temari was very wary of the blonde standing in front of her. Yes, this was the very same kid who'd beaten the absolute shit out of her demon-possessed brother. And not only did he beat Gaara, but he'd somehow also beat something into Gaara's head. Her brother was now a lot more humble, patient and less prone to solve problems with his tried and tested method squishing things with sand. So, anyone who could turn her brother into a martyr certainly was someone to be reckoned with. Heya, came Naruto's enthusiastic salutation. Do you know where my brothers are? Temari's eyes flicked around, this time looking for traces of a scuffle, mainly in the terms of torn down buildings and debris. Or maybe blood smears. They're around somewhere. He shrugged. That grin was really starting to creep her out. Hey, want to get ramen with me? He cut in before she could excuse herself. Huh, then she did a double take. You want to take me out? Yeah, the implication had gone right over his head. You know, ramen, well, let's get some. Temari had to quickly conclude that her brothers were either being held ransom or that they were already dead. Either way, it looked to be an offer she couldn't refuse. Okay. She accepted out of fear. At first, Temari thought that Naruto was a clever little bastard to act so clueless, stupid and being downright loud, as was his attitude was consistent from the first time she met him and until now. However, soon after arriving at Ichiraku, Naruto was in the middle of ranting about his exploits to be, the idiocy of perverts and his goal for Hokage whilst tearing through his 8th bowl, that had something dawn on the fan using kunoichi. The blonde boy is a clueless, stupid and a downright loud, little bastard. And how he beat Gaara, looking to be as harmless as she realized he was, she would probably never know. It truly was an impossible paradox that the moron could defeat her genius, possessed brother. However, despite those failings, he was also determined, enthusiastic and ambitious. Very ambitious. Aiming for the village's highest title ambitious. It was at least admirable. So, when he offered to take her out shopping, she accepted. Of course, it's not like she could turn it down when he had offered to pay for her things. And the fact that she'd finally figured her brother's bailing out on her helped in making her acceptance that much sweeter. It would be thanks to the first store that would set the mood for the afternoon. Having realized that she had a male, though a fashion-impaired one, but a male nonetheless accompany her, Temari eventually got around to asking Naruto for his opinion on her choices. Considering how Jiraiya's manual had instructed never to argue with a woman, Naruto would always agree amiably. However, it should be pointed out that had the book not said so, the blonde leaf ninja would have done so anyway, what with Temari's very agreeable curves as it is. To her pleasant surprise, the eldest Sand sibling would find that despite her younger consort's boisterous and anti-pervert views, he was also easily cowed by, ironically enough, her, innocently, posing for him with the many and varied choices of clothing available. And boy, Naruto could attest to the clothing being many and varied. This in turn had led the Sand Ninja to be quite tickled pink by Naruto's dramatic mood changes, thus the blonde kunoichi would continue to purposely tease him by picking even racier clothing. This became quite the hobby, as with every store they visited, had them walk out with even more purchases, up to the point where Naruto employed shadow replications, and even then, Temari used those as a judging guide to her purchases. The ratio of reactions, purchase Tamari interpreted and termed were as follows. A handful of raised eyebrows and open mouths would have the clothing to be under consideration. Open gaping and or dropping bags would constitute as pretty endearing. A shadow clone or a handful dispelling themselves out of sheer disbelief was plausibly special. And finally, though she'd yet to do so, a royal flush, otherwise a clean out of all the doppelgangers and felling the original was definitely a keeper. Greatly enjoying his company and manipulating him for her own whims, Tamari never suspected that Naruto was also manipulating her in his own way as to keep her from visiting a certain district as to where she might coincidentally walk into a specific pair she was related to. It was now after several hours since their lunch at the Ichiraku. The female Sand sibling had just entered another store on her spree and Naruto was left with handling all of her purchases and was forcibly waiting outside. It just wasn't the type of clothing store for young men to be in, especially not younger men. Taking this time out for a breather, the original Naruto tiredly leaned against a nearby wall, allowing himself to ease up on his strained arms. The chakra consorts took this time to whine to each other and make small talk, getting odd looks from passerbys. I think I'm in over my head, Naruto complained before he turned a little angry and threw an evil eye in the general direction of the two males who'd put him up to this. Those Sand guys owe me big time. Then he noticed it out of the corner of his eye. Though several other articles of cloth covered the most of it, there was something about it that called to him. Leaving his share of bags with the entourage, he entered the shop and had a closer look at what caught his eye. And it caused Naruto to smile. He found Sakura's perfect gift. The duo finally arrived at Temari's current place of stay. Her brothers hadn't arrived before them, so then she'd started putting away her many purchases, whilst leaving Naruto to seat himself on the steps outside. Eventually, he began to ponder over his original gift to Sakura. What to do, what to do? He mumbled as he pulled the present from out of his holster and proceeded to turn the box containing the choker over and over. I mean, there's no way I'm giving it to Sakura-chan, no way I can return it and no way I'm wearing it. It's easily justifiable why he wouldn't give it to Sakura or why he wouldn't wear it himself, but returning the collar was definitely out of the question. He'd managed to spot the stall during Temari's spree and as soon as he tried to approach it, the older man cackled and in a flurry of leaves disappeared, stall and all. Crazy, stingy old man. Unfortunately Naruto had been so caught up in his musings that he'd failed to see Tamari approach, who luckily did not catch the tail end of his thinking out loud. What's that you got there? The girl of the sand asked, having finished her activity of putting away her purchases. The whiskered boy panicked at being caught off guard. He scrambled for an answer and was quick to turn to a certain book for guidance or to be specific, the same chapter he was currently up to. IG got this earlier today and it reminded me of you. He finished uncertainly, holding out the gift-wrapped present against his better judgment. Blinking, Tamari accepted and started unwrapping her gift with mild excitement. Naruto's clones that he'd forgotten to negate, realized the situation before he did and they all inwardly groaned with a clone or two slapping their heads in resignation. Seeing the clones' reactions, Naruto realized he'd just handed a gift he'd never give to Sakura-chan to another girl. He mentally kicked himself over and over again, figuring he was going to be in for it. When Tamari took out the choker, she gave pause and blinked several times over, simply staring at the cloth. When her gaze switched to Naruto, the boy closed his eyes, tucked his hands behind his head helplessly, grinned and then followed it with a shrug. He earnestly hoped that his sweating profusely wasn't too obvious. Her gaze swept over to the other Naruto clones, who tried to look inconspicuous, before settling back on the one that had handed it to her. However, Tamari had no intention of hitting him. I think it's kind of kinky. An odd smile had spread over her face, as she proceeded to slip the collar on. Naruto felt his jaw drop and, for some reason, all the clones instantly dispelled themselves, causing Temari's grin to wryly widen though she pretended she didn't notice. There's still a bit of light outside. Tamari stated once the cloth was securely hugging her neck, effectively bringing Naruto out of his gaping. Any place interesting around here to finish up the day with? It's nearly sunset, the younger man noted when he glanced over to the direction of the sunlight streaming in from one of the windows. Suddenly, he grabbed Tamari's hand. I want to show you my favorite place. The sand ninja's brows furrowed, but she nodded her consent and they sped away. Tamari would soon find herself looking over the entire city on top of the Hokage monument. She'd taken a few steps away from her tour guide and allowed her breath to be taken away by the sheer undeniably astounding view of the whole hidden leaf that bathed in summer shades of the setting star. Someday, my face will be up here. I guarantee it, Naruto exclaimed, watching the other blonde with an apt interest and waiting for her to reply. Tamari turned around and chuckled. You, Hokage. No offense Uzumaki, but you aren't exactly the sharpest kunai in the pack. Naruto ignored the quip and calmly walked past her. I may not be smart or be really strong, or I'm popular for the wrong reasons. The blonde boy admitted. He'd reached the tip of a strand of the fourth stone hair and she trailed after him at a more sedate pace. But I know I'll keep learning, keep growing, and everyone will have to eventually like me if I keep saving them. He clenched a fist and held it at arm's length. Then he turned to Tamari and opened his hand, holding it out for her take. And, no matter what, I'll protect this place, till the day I die. He vowed. Just watch me. In that split second, the sun had set a pinnacle right behind Naruto's head, framing his wild blonde hair in a golden halo. And Tamari held her breath. Where Shikamaru's lazy demeanor contrasted with his hidden brilliance, that created a mystery and set Tamari's heart on a curious flutter. Naruto's inspiration had ignited a spark of something indefinable. It may have been only a spark now, Tamari knew, but if properly cultivated, the person who would tame this sunset storm would never have to glance elsewhere for more devotion, pride, and potential that stood before her. So caught up in her realization that Naruto was left hanging and he'd tilted his head at her in confusion. It caused her to finally break out of her trance, and she more than willingly took his waiting hand. But she'd cheekishly pulled him down hard instead. He'd flailed wildly, falling towards her, but she scooped him up easily and held him in a tight embrace. Hearing her melodious laugh echo in his ear, Naruto allowed himself to relax and take in the moment. When she'd finally began loosening her grip, her mouth moved in on his ear and whispered. If anyone can do it, it'd be you, Uzumaki. And just as she was pulling away, Naruto's back stiffened lightly. She'd impishly gave his cheek a quick peck. With her actions giving justified cause to her rather noticeably growing blush, Tamari unfolded her large fan, jumped on and sailed off the monument, heading towards the direction of where she and her brothers were taking up temporary residence in a deliberate effort to put as much distance between herself and the Leaf Ninja. By the time Naruto was ready to say something, Tamari was already a fair distance away, lucky for her, considering Naruto's penchant luck to ruin moments. He could only look on silently, as she sailed further away, and he rubbed at his cheek, confused. However, when she gave a wave over her back, he returned it. Course, he also stumbled over when it all sunk in. The heck was that? Aino-san, what are you doing at Naruto-kun's house? Eep. Hinata. The platinum blonde-haired halted, flailing for an excuse to give her violet-haired companion. Luckily, she was saved from answering when someone else appeared. Hey, you guys beat me here. Tenten walked up to the duo. Is Naruto in? No, he hasn't been home all of day. The blonde female folded her arms, irritated. This caused Hinata's eyes to widen, and she was about to ask how the Yamanaka knew that when said female gave an odd look to the weapon-using kunoichi and brought up a more interesting question. What brings you here anyway? Ah. The hair-bund girl recoiled slightly at Ino's accusing tone, and it caused her to flounder for an excuse. She wasn't about to tell them that she trailed Hinata from the distance. Cause air. I wanted to train with him. Her answer didn't sound very convincing. Her audience of the Yamanaka and Hyuga heiresses looked Tenten over once and gave the older girl a skeptical look. Reet. Ino drew out the I. Hinata hadn't said anything, but she did look displeased. Flushing at having her lie caught, Tenten blushed but was quick to turn the tables over. So what are the both of you doing here, then? This immediately cowed both Ino and Hinata. They both had the grace to blush. Wanted to train with him too. The blonde girl replied. Hinata nodded in agreement. They all stood in awkward silence for a bit, each in a deep shade of crimson, until Tenten decided on moving things along as all their motives were brought to light. So both of you haven't seen him too, huh? Ino and Hinata shook their heads. I've been to all his haunts. Ino admitted. I bet Hinata did too. If the timid girl could blush harder, she would. Where could he be then? Tenten muttered as she tilted her head back. She caught movement in the corner of her eyes and focusing on it, she discerned that it was Tamari, the one genin that denied her chance at becoming Chunin. She fumed at how effortlessly the sand girl flew by overhead on her fan. If she met that girl face to face, it would be too soon. Oh, it's Tamari-san. The sand female's motion didn't go by unnoticed by Tenten's companions either. She probably have saw Naruto from up there. Ino exclaimed, before taking off after the gliding ninja with Hinata in tow. Tenten inwardly screamed, but she followed the other girl's lead. There were bigger things at stake here. Tamari had just touched down at the door of her current residence and was in the middle of retrieving her keys from her pockets when three panting familiar-looking females interrupted her. Have you seen Naruto? The blonde one cut to the chase. Tamari lifted an eyebrow at that and scanned her crowd. There was a blonde girl, a white-eyed girl, who gave a polite but shy greeting, and a hair bund. Ah, they were all the girls who got to the Chunin exam preliminaries. The last one lost to her. She grinned favorably at the weapons user, who scowled, folded her arms and looked away. When the platinum blonde started tapping her foot impatiently, Tamari got back to the issue at hand. Uzumaki Naruto? Tamari asked for clarification, to which her audience nodded in reply. Yeah, he's at the Hokage monument. I was just there and. Come on. Someone interrupted her and they all made a hasty beeline for the Leaf's monument. And just like that, Tamari was alone again, unable to continue her explanation for why she and Naruto were there together. Giving it a shrug, she entered her abode and greeted her brothers a good evening. Though the evening would not get better for said brothers. Meanwhile, back on the Hokage monument. What am I still doing here? Naruto finally found his thoughts. I got to find Sakura-chan to give her the present I got for her. And with that, he dashed off, leaving the monument and the deep silence that it was normally privy to. However, silence didn't mean empty. There was still one person in the vicinity. The toad hermit, who had seen the whole torrid affair from a distance, was furiously writing into a notebook and tears were streaming down his face, much alike what you would see on a waterfall. I can't believe he got so far on the first date with the exotic sand girl. Then he'd paused in realization. And he didn't even read the dating chapter. Despite his great physical condition, the old frog sage started to hyperventilate. That magnificent bastard. He growled several more times and using more expletives, before finally calming down enough to reach for a leather-bound manual and writing at a less speedy pace. He wasn't too surprised when a group of 3 females burst into the scene. However, he had to keep switching between notebook and manual from the new ideas pouring forth thanks to this particular running gag. Hinata was feeling a little anxious about today. She had some unsorted feelings towards Naruto and, as much as she wanted time to figure it out, the other girls were starting to see the whiskered boy under a different light. In other words, Hinata knew she was going against the clock. Currently, it was common knowledge among the other kunoichis that Naruto was on a mission today. Not that it was a problem for the Hyuga heiress. Her teacher had dismissed her team's training today, claiming the need to be elsewhere, so Hinata both had the time and the means to be able to search the blonde boy out. So, with the thought of competition and a time limit hanging over her shoulder, the pale-eyed girl had a boost of confidence that, hopefully, would allow her courage to hold out when asking Naruto for more than the time. She'd wanted to confront him while he was at home, but she stalled for so long that by the time she decided to strive onward, he left his house again, effectively setting her back. However, once he entered into more familiar areas, Hinata tapped into a well of courage and she dove head first. Naruto-kun. She called out to him after he'd walked into more coincidental public areas, instead of coincidental stalking areas. Hi Hinata-chan. He paused in mid-step and greeted her. What's up? Before she could get a word out, Naruto followed it up with a question. Hey, were you busy on Friday or something? He asked with a tilt of his head. When you weren't coming, I went to look for you but I couldn't find you. My teacher, Kei Kurenai-sensei, she was quickly interrupted by Naruto's impatient guesses. Teacher held you back, huh? Yeah, Kakashi-sensei does that to us sometimes too. They both nodded understandingly for the well-meaning of their own instructors, though Naruto was quick to add under his breath. Lazy bastard. If he came on time, then we wouldn't need to stay back. What was that? Not quite catching that last part, Hinata tilted her in question at Naruto's mumbled afterthought. Embarrassed at being caught, the blonde shinobi shifted topics. Wow, Hinata, he exclaimed, looking her over with a wide-open mouth in exclamation. You're going somewhere, huh? Maybe some posh clan thing, right? The loud male's current theory had been based on the observation of the timid female's choice of clothes. Not that it was different from what she normally wore, it's just that Hinata had accessorized to appear more dressed up for a casual outing. This included a necklace and more form-fitting formal pair of black pants, wherein the fabric did look more expensive than the norm. Hinata shook her head at his guess. She was only dressed up a little more for one reason, and it was to catch someone's eye, to which it apparently successfully did so. Oh ho, you're going on a date. Naruto somehow correctly guessed second time around. The Hyuga blushed a deep crimson and looked away, a hand of hers going up to cover her features. Not one to be known for being subtle, Naruto took the gesture as an excuse to keep prodding. Who's the lucky guy? Kiba, or maybe Shino? The female student of Team 8 blushed further. She hadn't really entertained the notion of having a relationship with her teammates at all. Well, at least because a certain outspoken genin was always figuratively standing at the forefront of her mind. Ironically enough, said aforementioned genin was also literally standing in front of her at this current moment. No, I'm not involved with TH. She was about to deny any links above a professional and friendly relationship with her teammates when Naruto interrupted her for the umpteenth time they started conversing. No wait. How stupid of me. I remember hearing this from somewhere. Naruto blinked with a sort of realization slowly dawning over his face. You big hosh-posh clans have some sort of arranged marriages, right? That means it's someone from your clan. The idiot blonde then grasped for the only other Hyuga name he knew of. You're off on a date with Neji. No. Hinata was surprised with the quick and vehement denial in her voice. Neji had been a lot nicer to her lately, yes, but, a while back, he also wasn't entirely looking out for her well-being. And she saw him as an older brother, and they were still mending that rift from that event several years back, and a lot of other things. She just needed to think more on it. The unbidden thoughts had quickly started to eat at her courage, so Hinata forced her hand before it was too late. Actually, Naruto, I was wanting to ask if you, only to be interrupted again. Ah geez. The blonde genin interrupted yet again when he made a glance for his watch. You're gonna have to tell me about it another time, Hinata-chan. I want to see Tsunade Obachan, and I got to go now before she tries to avoid work and goes to get plastered. The whiskered ninja spun on his heel and took a few hurried steps before looking over his shoulder and added as an afterthought. See ya. Let's train together sometime. And just like that, Naruto had ran off to the administration building, leaving Hinata to her thoughts. Specifically, the worrisome ones about whether or not she was going to be arranged to her wayward cousin. Most of the Hyuga elders had Hyuga wives after all. Coming to the conclusion that the possibility was all too likely, Hinata headed home to examine her family laws. She knew of only a handful of Hyuga that married outside the clan, and she was determined to make sure that she'd be able to choose who her wayward spouse will be. Hopefully wayward in a good sort of way. It was in a few scant minutes that Naruto finally reached the Hidden Leaf's administration building, and it took him even less time than that to reach the Hokage's office. Only to find the room unoccupied. Where's the old lady? Naruto asked the nearest clerical ninja, as he pointed a thumb over his shoulder and indicated towards the empty workspace. She's in a meeting right now. The random nameless passerby replied, wincing at Naruto's disrespect. You'll just have to come by some other time. And with that, the unimportant person had disappeared to parts where unimportant people disappear to. Naruto glanced from hallway to hallway. He more or less knew the whole layout of the tower, what with his constant visits to the late third Hokage, and started on his way, choosing a seemingly random direction. Since his reputation preceded him, Naruto knew he couldn't ask anyone where the room was, so he followed his instinct. When he eventually came across a door with two Anbu guarding it, he knew he came across the right place. The way the Anbu noticed him coming and moved to defend the entry point only confirmed things. Oh, and the sudden appearance of other ninja were proof that it was going to be difficult. But Naruto loved those odds more than anything, and his hands were already in position for a handseal. Several moments prior, an assembly of the Leaf's ninja members of a specific minority had gathered. Their goal was simple. It was supposed to be about brainstorming the recruitment process, as well as a general gathering on group support and exchanging tips in training students and such. So when Naruto burst in, whilst being unsuccessfully restrained by two Anbu personnel and several nameless ninja clerics, accountants, all except Naruto were bleeding from the nose, and the whiskered boy was claiming that he needed to see the Hokage, everyone was very much interested in what he had to say. Though coming from Naruto, they expected that it probably wouldn't be all too informative. Knowing exactly how to deal with this, Tsunade ordered Naruto be let go and for the excessive amount of people to leave. This had better be important, Naruto. The blonde Hokage growled and prodded the interrupter of their meeting to explain himself. However, Naruto couldn't find his voice at this point. He took one look at the crowd and merely opened and closed his mouth in a startling imitation of a goldfish. When the Hokage tapped her foot impatiently, the action had gotten through and caused the young boy to remember her infamous temper in conjunction with her even more infamous colossal strength that was usually proven as the follow-up to the aforementioned temper. Can I, talk to you, in private? The young male squeaked. Tsunade narrowed her eyes and her lips tightened into a thin line. You have interrupted our scheduled kunoichi gathering, Naruto. She stood and indicated to her audience of annoyed females. Among the faces, Naruto was able to easily discern Shizune, Kurenai and Anko. We, the female ninjas of the Leaf, are discussing formal events concerning kunoichi enrollment, as well as other very important topics that we have had to schedule weeks ahead. Tsunade had taken a step to punctuate every word and now stood nose to nose with the blonde boy. And now you want to talk with me in private? She hissed. Naruto nodded uneasily. The Hokage then swiveled, faced her entourage of female junins and placing a hand around the boy's shoulder. I'm sure whatever you have to say can be shared with all here, am I right everyone? Shizune, Kurenai, Yugo, Suzume as well as a handful of other women nodded. Anko leered from her seat. Their reaction had Naruto audibly swallow in worry. So you better say it now, in front of everyone, or else I'm having you banned from the tower unless you make a formal appointment like everyone else. The Hokage casually threatened the youth. Banned. Naruto squeaked further. Banned. B-A-N-N-E-D. Banned. Prohibited. Forbidden. Banished. Exclude. Outlaw. Restrict. Tsunade counted off a few synonyms as she examined her nails coolly. Naruto's face contorted to reflect his internal conflict. It's, he repeated like a broken record. After a moment or two of this, the Hokage had enough. Okay, I now formally proclaimed you, Uzumaki Naruto, ban. It's about a girl. Naruto panicked, willing to sacrifice his dignity to keep his unannounced visiting privileges. This had the majority of the females present to blink and start a small round of pointed murmuring. Is that all? Tsunade rolled her eyes. Should I go to Ero Sennin about it then? Naruto folded his arms indignantly. Tsunade and Shizune shared a knowing frown, being the only people who knew who Naruto was referring to as a pervert hermit. I did say we could speak as long as you do it in front of my associates, Naruto. Tsunade said carefully, an eye on the many faces watching her and Naruto. Her audience had looked a lot more disgruntled at her proclamation for the continual interruption of their meeting. That and some people still felt a little apprehensive towards Naruto's history. Quote. Besides, it is better that you get advice from actual women, rather than seeking advice from Jiraiya. She made sure to pronounce the last part rather loudly for her associates' benefit. This time, their audience had looked a lot more agreeable about her decision. Naruto was the lesser of two evils at that point. Tsunade then brought an arm around Naruto and started guiding him to the head of the table. However, before she could get started on drilling for the specifics, she noticed an extra person within the room. There appeared to be a generic female clerical ninja attempting to look more generic, whilst standing at the door. This had the slug sage to narrow her eyes in suspicion. You. She addressed the female. What's your purpose here? The interrogated had paused from writing in her notepad, to look up surprised at being pointed out. She sputtered for a second or two, before declaring that she was just keeping an eye on the boy and was ready to call Anbu if necessary. Tsunade eyed the newcomer with distaste, but eventually let the girl off the hook provided she stays at her place next to the door, to which the girl quickly agreed. The Hokage then prompted Naruto to speak on exactly what was on his mind, and the troubled boy admitted that it was dating. This had the crowd move into relative consideration about their own abysmal love lives, which opened up casual talks between the members. Eventually, Tsunade called order. I think we should ask him his plans first, she suggested. Then we can correct him and give him tips at what he should be doing. Everyone agreed to this and Naruto was allowed to speak. Well, what should I say? He asked for clarification. Like, where are you going to for a first, second and third date? Someone helpfully advised. First, second and third. Naruto tilted his head to the side and tapped his chin. Hey, I was thinking, a movie and dinner. He concluded with a shrug. You know, for the first date. Geez, that's pretty standard. Anko rolled her eyes at the simplicity that she found so absurd. It's only the first date. Kurenai reprimanded the scathing Junin. Don't be so harsh on him. He's still a kid. The once snake apprentice relented, but unwilling to be cowed, she'd added in her own advice. Fine, but don't forget, guys have to pay for the date. No, they don't. Shizune butted in. It's a mutual decision by both parties to attend a date together. Then she turned and gave Naruto her advice on the matter. But it usually denotes a chivalrous nature if the man does intend to treat the woman by taking the bill. Anko childishly folded her arms and humphed at her disregarded views, muttering something about cheap ramen dates anyway. Naruto opened his mouth to ask someone to explain to him what chivalrous meant, but Tsunade prodded him to continue with his thoughts for the second date. So Naruto did so. For the second one, I was thinking I'll help her learn how to walk on water. The statement got both disapproving and speculating looks, but Naruto quickly detailed how he was thinking about a lunchtime date nearby a waterfall he used to train by. Maybe a picnic lunch, and then they could practice water walking and generally messing around until they were tired, which ought to be around the time the sun would set, and figured that they could watch it together. This had Naruto's audience blinking in wonder and mild disbelief. To the skewed view of the regular kunoichi, it seemed that this was a brilliant idea, and none of them had ever expected anyone, let alone the Uzumaki, to even think of it. Each female was suddenly reminded of how terrible and dysfunctional some of their own dates went. If they were even dates, for that matter, as some would admit that their first date Anniversaries were based on the day they managed to get their tongues inside their respective partners' mouths while on a mission. More than a little disturbed at the silence, or rather at how each woman went into their own reverie, Naruto continued with his idea for the third date. It consisted of saving up to go to either a really lavish restaurant or for some luxury treatment at the hot springs, which was a lead up to his finale. Then I was also thinking of getting her a kunai as a present then. See, it's because of our training on walking up trees and we'd have to slash the tree to indicate how far we got, right? Well, I was having trouble, so I asked her for help, and though she didn't have to, she told me stuff that helped me out. Naruto's excitement was getting him a little off track and he was quick to get back on the issue. So anyway, I'm going to go get a custom, good quality kunai made so I can have it engraved with a picture of a tree and maybe a haiku on the handle so it'd make her remember what she did for me. And if I can afford it, I'll see if I can get someone to maybe add something special like a hollow handle for needles or tags or something. The silence was deafening, and when no one was willing to remark, Fox Vessel wilted and took it as a bad omen. Bad idea, huh? At this point, Anko would have made some sort of disparaging exclamation, like perhaps, I need you. Or, have my baby. But she did no such thing on account of being too amazed to do so. She did, however, manage a low appreciative whistle. This started the chain reaction of the other women praising him for his ideas, well wishes for his own love life, and of admittances to wishing that the men on their dates could have planned better like his would seem. Tsunade even had to call order again, for the cacophony was getting louder than manners would permit in such formal gatherings. I bet my student, Hyuga Hinata, would be pleased. Kurenai's statement received quite a bit of attention from the women present, and she preened at the attention. Naruto was an odd topic, being that it was he who defeated Hyuga Neji in the Chunin exam finals and possibly brought out the more friendly demeanor that Branch House member was sorely due for. Hinata. Why would I date Hinata? Naruto blinked. Though it went unnoticed by him, everyone went silent. I meant, who are you doing this for? The Genjutsu mistress faltered and attempted to correct her assumption. Why? Sakura-chan, of course. Naruto lit a broad grin. This caused many of the people there to shake their heads in clear distaste to his choice. Then Tsunade stepped in, so they could finally tie up Naruto's love life troubles and move on to their meeting. You actually have some good ideas, Naruto. I don't think I could actually help you since those sound a lot better than the dates I had been on. Tsunade's eyes briefly glanced to a certain cleric who flinched under the silent accusation. Then she escorted Naruto towards the exit. Well, we have to get down to business now. Off you go. Thanks everyone. Naruto waved enthusiastically as he exited. However, not even a second passed before the loud genin peeked in again with a somewhat embarrassed look on his face. Oh yeah, I nearly forgot my question, Tsunade Obachan. Tsunade's eye twitched, but she let his pet name for her slide. What is it, brat? Just because you hang out with a girl? He asked hesitantly. Doesn't make it a date, right? Of course. Tsunade rolled her eyes, as did many other women. Just checking. He gave a deep sigh of relief. Then the door shut and the echoes Naruto's footsteps retreated until he was gone. However, instead of Tsunade positioning herself back in her meeting chair, she moved over and stood in front of the woman, the one whom she'd granted to stand by the doorframe. That woman had alternated between watching the events and writing into her notepad. Currently, she was doing the latter, making her miss how she was currently in the center of the Hokage's attention and thus everyone else's. So what brings you here? Her question was covered in frost. Jiraiya. This had their audience collectively gasp. Some folded their arms over their chests, but many more started readying a weapon. Oh, the girl faltered and wisely decided on reverting back into the aged white-haired perverted hermit. I'm just following the boy around. He quickly explained. He's been providing great material to write about. Tsunade's eye twitched. She internally fought about whether to either question Jiraiya about some complaints or brain him through a wall. The wise slug sage came to an internal compromise. Her professional conduct would come first, then she'd brain him through a wall. It's likely that the first will be the cause of the second anyway. I have many complaints regarding you, Jiraiya. Tsunade said smoothly. All come from the bath houses. Except one. Her eyes narrowed in suspicion. It came from a bookstore, just yesterday. They refused to give a reason. The book signing. Jiraiya slapped his forehead in realization. I forgot all about that. Book signing. Everyone exclaimed at the same time. That caught even the Hokage by surprise. Gotta go. Jiraiya made quick work to follow his student's retreat. Tsunade sighed as she seated herself, as did all the other female Junins present. Jiraiya had gotten away and now was the time for business. I can't believe he's doing it for Sakura. Then one Kurenai Yuahi of Team 8 had to bring up Naruto. Why's that? Shizune asked and all the other women leaned in. This was especially good gossip concerning the apparent heiress of the Hyuga clan. How could anyone not want to listen in? Hinata had been pining for him for at least a year now. Yuahi had said as a matter of factly. Probably longer. I don't know. I admit they're rather cute looking together, but I honestly think Yamanaka Ino would do him good. Said the academy female ninja trainer, Suzume. And why would you say that? Yuahi folded her arms. Ino is the very essence of femininity. As a high graduate in the Kunoichi teachings, she has perfect balance between being a ninja and being a woman. Suzume nodded as she stated her piece. Besides, Hinata would be too quiet. The Uzumaki's too restless and the girl he needs should be a girl that could keep up with him. She punctuated her sentence by pushing the bridge of her glasses further along her nose. By that logic, Azuki Yugo, Anbu of several years interrupted. Tenten would make the better partner then. Everyone got a confused look on their face as they tried to match the name with a face, causing Yugo to sigh loudly. Brunette with hair buns, pink shirt and black pants. Weapons specialist. She listed of Tenten's more memorable attributes, but in seeing no one matching a face yet, she grit her teeth and used a description she was forced to bring up. Got to the Chunin preliminaries but was defeated by Tamari of the Sand. Ah, everyone collectively murmured as the realization dawned. Like I was saying, Tenten would be best then. She is just as full of energy as he is, when it comes to determination, and she takes her duties as a kunoichi very seriously. Yugo concluded. Then there was a general murmur between all the women present, each supplementing a female similar to Naruto's age bracket and how they would look cute together for some trivial reason or another. But aren't you all forgetting about the girl he set his heart on? Tsunade said out loud, and it got everyone's attention. Not only is Haruno Sakura demure, but she can also be spirited too. I think she would compliment him immensely if he ever wins her over. And she keeps him in line. When he grows up, he'll realize it's not good to be stuck in an abusive relationship. Kurenai sniffed in disdain at having her student dismissed so quickly. As opposed to one-sided communication. The female of the three legendary ninjas snorted. The only way they'll get together is if Hinata decides to be upfront or if Naruto gets a clue. The likelihood of both is a particularly low possibility. Suzume supplemented. The genjutsu specialist bristled, and before she could get another word in, Tsunade continued in her tirade. Besides, she doesn't really hit him. Those are just love taps. Shizune was immediately reminded of something by the blush on her cheeks, and the raven-haired young woman started stammering her own contribution. But Tsunade-sama. Her voice shook. What about Jiraiya-sama? Tsunade's eyes narrowed at her assistant. What about him? She stated neutrally, though her eyes promised anything but. Shizune gulped and averted her eyes, squeaked, nothing, to mark her jumping off the topic. Everyone caught on to the implication, but luckily for Shizune, it was Kurenai that decided to press it, and thus a target had been shifted. Yeah. The illusion specialist drawled out. What about you and him? There isn't a me and him. Tsunade folded her arms defensively. He's a senile, old pervert. Seeing that Tsunade was very red in the face, Kurenai didn't want to push her luck, as not to end up being pushed through a wall, and had fallen silent. Though the implication did hang in the air for all to see. Then, when one person noticed that Anko remained quiet through the whole proceeding, like a whirlpool, it started pulling everyone in as to hear what her piece would be. Her silence in itself was worrisome. What about you, Mitarashi-san? Shizune asked. Who do you think would be good for him? On hearing her name, Anko focused and she turned to face the expectant crowd. Oh, there's one person I've got in mind. She started and everyone paid close attention. She speaks her mind, sensible, mature, a sculpted body to die for with matching brains and just about exotic. She grinned a shark's grin. You don't mean Tamari of the Sand, do you? Yugo deadpanned. Hell no. Anko spun in her chair, arms spread dramatically. I mean me. The Naruto-ish. Junin